Mr.
Can
Januso?
we, here?
Mrs. Rogers?
Here.
Mrs. Barnes?
Here.
Mrs. Barney?
Here.
Mr. Roach?
Okay, can we have a motion to amend the authority bylaws?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, is there a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is reorganization. So we have a motion to appoint the chairman, and I'm going to make a motion to appoint Aaron Barnes as chairperson.
I'll second that.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, then we have a motion to appoint the vice chairman.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Roseanne Rogers to retain the position
I'll
of Vice
second
Chairman.
Okay, I'll second that motion. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, and then we have a motion to appoint the secretary treasurer.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Secretary Treasurer Don Januso.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, the next is a motion to appoint the assistant secretary treasurer. I'd like to make a motion to appoint Craig Roach as assistant secretary treasurer.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, the next item is a motion to appoint Gatons to Cherry and Nicholas as the solicitor for the authority.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, the next item is a motion to designate Lennon Smith Solar Ray Engineering Incorporated as the consulting engineer for the authority.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay. Next item is a motion to designate Mark C. Turnley, CPA, as the auditor for the authority.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, and lastly, a motion to designate CFS Bank as the depository for the authority.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, with that, I will turn the meeting over to our new chairperson, Aaron. Congratulations.
Thanks, Don. Big shoes to fill. I appreciate it. All right, we're going to start with the engineer's report. Kevin?
Yes, thank you for the reappointment, much appreciated. Enjoy working for the authority. First update on the Lawrence project, actually the three motions that's on the agenda are the biggest part of the update. Your increase in funding was increased per the request, so it matches. So for tonight, it is ripe for approving both contracts. So if it's okay, I'll go through those three motions and the board can take action on them, because I want to specify the contractor and the amount in the motions, if that's okay. So the first one was a motion to accept Penvest funding offer for $78,512 for the Village of Lawrence Facilities Project. That matches the request that you submitted and that they approved on the 12th.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Next is a motion to approve bid for contract number 21-STP1 treatment plant and lift station construction to Mealy and Sons, Inc. for $13,242,337.00.
Do I hear a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I think I heard Dawn and Darlene. Dawn, make that motion. Do I hear a second?
Yes.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Next is a motion to approve bid for contract number 2017-06, construction of Village of Lawrence sanitary sewers and appurtenances to Rudzik Excavating, Inc., for an amount of $5,985,449.00.
I'll make that motion.
Second? Do I hear?
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
The next steps in the project, then we will send out award letters and schedule the second meeting with Penvest, the solicitor's office, and get the process started there. It takes about 60 days to go through the process with Penvest, so we should have construction start somewhere around March, April with the latest, so with notice to proceed. So we'll keep you updated on that. The next item is...
One second. Sure. That didn't take long, did it?
No, that was, less than 30 days
No,
ago.
no,
We
I
weren't sure.
meant we got a Lawrence Sewer project now.
Woo! It wasn't me.
Hard to believe that.
We're finally there. The next item was motion to authorize signing the sewer acceptance resolution, 2023-01 for McConnell's Trails Phase 3A. I believe they've got everything submitted that they have, so it's ripe for approval also.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Okay, do we have a motion to adopt the 2023 budget? I think you all received that in your packet. We'll need to pass a motion and a second before there's any discussion. Somebody like to make the motion to pass the budget?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion necessary? We should probably note that Dawn and I were part of the Budget Committee and reviewed it a couple of times with Mike and with Shanna, and got some question answered, and I think they're good there. So roll call vote then, please, if there's no discussion.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, solicitors report, Chris?
Okay, thank you, and thank you also for the appointment of GTN, and Ramel, I'm sure, is very happy to continue serving as your solicitor. I submitted a written report just to highlight a couple of things with regard to the Lawrence project. Ramel is continuing with negotiations with the treatment plant site property owner. That is secured, it's totally secured, but we've been working to try to amicably resolve that, and there's discussions ongoing with that. You also received the most recent packet of emails from Ms. McCullough. There were a couple that involved the authority, but at this time, we don't believe that it involves any legal allegations. So we continue to monitor that situation. The CHJA litigation, just briefly, there's an oral argument on the motion for judgment on the pleadings set for January 25th, 2023. Ramel will be there, so we'll have an update after that. And the final thing is that Ramel and I have been working with Aaron, Roseanne, Shanna, and Mike with a personnel manual to update it. The last update was 2008, so there's been obviously some things that could be looked at, and we've been doing that. And discussing a couple other personnel issues. So I believe that Aaron and Roseanne, we would like an executive session just to briefly talk about a couple things on that at the end of the meeting.
Yes.
Okay. And that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Okay. Business managers report?
Okay, your packet included the financial statements for November 2022. Any questions? And also, in everyone's packet, there is a statement of financial interest from the State Ethics Commission. If you all can just fill that out and get that back to me, because we have to keep it on file in the office.
Okay. The authority managers report, Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have one thing that I need to amend the agenda. While I was putting it together, I forgot to put the minutes for the December 20 minutes for the December 20th meeting. So I need to have a motion to amend the agenda to add acceptance of the 2020, or December 2022 minutes.
I'll make the motion to amend the minutes, or I'm sorry, the agenda.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call vote. Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
And now we need a motion to accept the December 20th, 22 meeting minutes.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Just a few things on my report to go over is the backflow preventers that are required for annual testing at Cherry Brook and Miller's Run. They have been completed and everything is passed that has been submitted to the water company, so those records are in place. I know I had been talking about the purchase of some laboratory equipment for process control down at the treatment plants. I'd recommended purchasing an analytical balance, a drying oven, a vacuum pump, and a microscope. At the last meeting, I only had one quote in. I have 4 quotes now. It ranged from $4,180.14 to $6,265.50. Colonial Scientific was the best pricing. I can continue to get some more prices, but this equipment will help the guys dial in the process control for the plant and help the plants run better. And at the end of the day, we're able to split that over the 3 plants, the cost. So I just want to let everybody know that that's our best pricing that we got with Colonial Scientific. The doors for the grid handling building, we talked about this as well. We had put $25,000 in the capital improvement budget for 2022. At the time, we only had one estimate from Acme Door, and that was for $15,228 for fiberglass doors. After some discussion, we wanted to get pricing for steel doors as well. Acme has submitted the price for the steel doors. That is $9,728. This includes paint, labor, installation, hardware, that's everything. At the time, Firewoods Commercial Doors is in the process of preparing a quote for us for both fiberglass and steel doors, so I should have that for next month's meeting. We also discussed reaching out to Dano Doors. I did reach out to them. They do not do this type of door. So, but I did reach out to them, so I'll have a final recommendation for everyone at the February meeting. Next item is the Cool Valley project update. The developers, engineering firm, and T&R Properties have sent over the master utility plan and illustrative plan. They also provided some preliminary flow data. I forwarded this over to Kevin at LSSE and along with Walt, since he has been with that project since the start. So we're in the process of working on that. Basically, the suggestion is that we need to have a meeting internally, Kevin, Walt, myself, to discuss some items there, and then we can move forward with that, but I want to let everybody know that we're working on that. Charles Street Sewer Extension acceptance by the authority took place on July 1st of 2021. 18 months on the maintenance bond would put us at December 2022. The owner has requested release of the maintenance bond. I have to go through and review everything, but if everything is satisfactory, I recommend that we release the maintenance bond. But I want to make everybody aware that that's going to be coming up, so we have to look into a couple items on that, but we're at that 18-month point. And then the last item I have is we had a water leak adjustment for 79 Windcrest Drive. Sent everybody out a memo. Basically, at the end of the day, they had a leaking faucet on the outside of the building. It was leaking into the ground. We went back through and determined a calculation. There's no sewer line, there's no anything near that area. So based on the formula that has been used in the past, we determined the highest monthly usage, which was 8,000 gallons. We multiplied that by 3 to come up with 24,000 as the maximum to be treated in a 3-month period. We took that from, what was used during the leak period, and that's the difference that we came up with, a credit of $1,460.30. Basically, I pulled the water leak data, or the water data from the water company. The usage is back down to a normal range. Took a look at the property. Everything seems to be acceptable. All we would need to do is authorize that credit in the amount of $1,460.30 to be reapplied to their account.
Okay, so are we looking for a motion?
Yes, we would need a motion to authorize a credit to that account in the amount of $1,460.30.
Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
I'm going to abstain. I have a history with that property.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
I couldn't hear everything, so I don't know whether I should vote on this or not.
Would you like me to go over it again?
Just the last couple sentences or so, and then I can probably pick up from there.
Okay. Basically, we went through and I took a look at the water usage for their calendar year. based on their usage, the highest monthly usage, which was 8,000 gallons that they used in a single month period, we multiplied the 8,000 gallons times the 3-month period to come up with 24,000 gallons. That would be the maximum that would have been treated during that 3-month period of the leak. Then, using the calculation, they used 195,800 gallons during the leak period. We subtracted 24,000 gallons, and that gives a difference of 171,800 gallons that did not go in, or that was not treated. Based on the $850 per thousand, comes to a credit of $1,460.30.
And what is their final bill? Yeah, if you give them credit for $1,430, I'm sorry, I didn't catch what the bill is, or what the initial bill is less the 1,400.
The bill was $2,122.09.
$9.09, okay. So is that what they're on a hook for? I mean, is that what they have to pay according to the water leak?
According to the water leak, that's what they would have had to pay.
Okay. I'll vote yes.
Okay? And finally, Mr. Roach.
Aye.
Okay, and do we need another motion for Gary Plan Maintenance Bond Release, and that's the Charles Street, I take it, correct? If everything is satisfactory.
Everything is satisfactory.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
I'm having trouble hearing too. I'm getting a lot of feedback. What motion is this now?
This is
what
for
item?
the Charles Street bond release, the
Oh,
maintenance
okay.
bond.
Yeah. Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay,
That's all I have.
thanks, Mike. Review of correspondence, do we have anything? Anybody? No? Okay. We need a motion to approve the payment and expenses or transfer of funds, et cetera, for the checks, payroll, tax, et cetera. Do I hear a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
I'll second.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, comments from the floor? Tom, have anything?
I didn't see the agenda, I would have bought champagne for 30 years in the making.
That's it? Thank you. Okay, no other comments. Jack? All right, now we need a motion for executive session for personnel matters. And this one should be short. Do I hear motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call?
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, so we're gonna do some logistics here. I think it's probably best if we stay here. It is the last item. Thanks, Tom. And you guys can,
Is Jack still there?
he is, you can stay on. Jack and Mike and Shanna are going to walk out. Didn't think about that. Okay, we're all back. Okay, do we need to have anything coming out of executive session?
Just note the time.
We are back at 7:26. And do I have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make that motion. Aye. Thanks, Don.
We're carrying on the, all right, thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Jack, do you have a recycling or shredder, document shredder in here? Okay, all right.
Yeah. I know. Every year.
Okay, all right, thanks.
On a bunch of these.
Okay.
So
Yep.
you sign one of those spots,
Okay.
and then these are each.
Shut up.
We can let you off.
No, we're good.
And then on each bank account.
Okay.
I think it's the last page. One of these.
So just go through and just sign
Yep.
all of them, John, see?